Hello, welcome. We are here to explore Retrium today. You're here with LitheSpeed, and LitheSpeed was named one of CIO Review Magazine's top 10 most promising Agile consultancies in 2019. We have a whole lot of Agile experts on our team, and we know a good retrospective tool when we see one. So we're here with Meagan Evertson, and she is customer success at Retrium. I was chatting with her. She's done a lot of demos, but today's is special, right, Meagan?
Absolutely.
That's right. We're saying goodbye to our own retrospective tool, Retrium. That's yours. Sensei was ours. A fond farewell. But we're so excited to explore Retrium. So if you're here with us today, you can go ahead and ask any questions down in the bottom right question area. And this sounds like it's going to be an interactive, fun demo. If you're here live, you'll also get a link to the recording in an email in case you want to share it to anyone, with anyone, or watch it again. So with that, I'm Audrey. I'll be monitoring the chat. And Meagan, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Audrey. So like she said, I am one of the customer success managers at Retrium. And what we'd like to do today, since we've got what looks to be a manageable group joining us for today's demo, is we would like to make it interactive so that you can really experience the real-time collaboration that Retrium has to offer your retrospective experience. So a couple ground rules, though, to make sure that we can do this peacefully and have a good experience together. In a moment, I am going to use the chat functionality on the GoToWebinar control panel to share a link with everyone. What this is going to allow you to do is actually join me in our space today for running some retrospective formats. When you first get in and click on that link, you're going to be presented with the option to click a button that says Continue as Guest. I'm going to ask you to click that to get into the team room with me, and then I'm going to ask you to wait. It is going to be very tempting to want to play around and explore, but I am going to ask that we don't do that today. We'll save that for hopefully the free trial that you sign up for after today's demo. So without further ado, I'm going to share that link. Again, you're going to click to continue as a guest. And then once I see that we've got most of the group in, we should be able to get started. So Audrey, I'm going to check this out. I want to make sure I can get this to everyone. I may need your assistance.
All right, everyone should be seeing this link.
Wonderful. Thank you for the help there, Audrey. All right, so we'll give it just a couple minutes. If you don't feel like participating today, I am sharing my screen, so you'll be able to see what's going on by watching. So we'll leave that at your discretion. You do not have to join. We'd love to have you, but you can also watch my screen as well to see what this experience looks like. Awesome. So I see a couple people getting in. So right away, while we're just waiting here, seeing who's going to join us in the demo for the interaction part of today, I'm able to monitor who's joining us. And that's an important part of what we're going to talk about today as we go through this, is that real-time collaboration and engagement. So while people are logging in, we can kind of set the stage just a little bit. So a lot of times people come to us saying, I'm experiencing low participation, a lack of psychological safety. There's challenges if you have some remote members and others are not. There's also a lack of follow through. Those are typically the 4 issues that we hear the most. And so in building out Retrium, what you're going to see today is a couple things. We're focused on psychological safety. That's a big part that influences a lot of how we design the platform. So we'll definitely be highlighting that. But also the ability to collaborate with your team and get through these critical conversations and have actionable takeaways. That is going to be that sort of underlying theme, is how do you really have those good conversations and keep people engaged. So I see we've got about 7 people present, 20 people on the webinar right now. I'll give it just another minute, and then we're going to walk you through a couple different formats today. Retrium offers what's called team radars, which is a quantitative exercise and can be a great way to kick off your retrospective, as well as column style formats, which you're probably more familiar with Lean Coffee or what went well, what didn't go well, those types of formats. Fantastic. So still a couple names popping in. This is wonderful to see. Awesome. All right, so why don't we actually get started. If you're still trying to get into Retrium, that's fine. You'll be able to join midway. And again, just want to remind anyone that might be just joining us in the interactive side of things, please don't click unless asked to, just so we can keep everyone having a good experience together. All right, so where are we right now is probably the first question we're asking. What is a team room? So a team room is going to be critical to your experience. This is going to be how you start to create that psychological safety for your team. A team room is where you'll run your retrospectives, where you'll access the history of those retrospectives, and maintain a members list. So who actually should be able to participate and view the information shared in this team room. So this can be a team that's based on products, a team that is working on multiple projects and products and stays the same over time, or teams may change over time. But the ultimate goal is that a group of people that needs to come together to have this critical conversation has the safe space to do so. And that's where we are right now. So from there, like I said, we're going to kick off by running a couple different retros today. So if you are looking at this screen share, what you should see is I initiated the option to start a retro, and I'm presented with a menu of multiple different techniques in terms of retrospectives. We have a list of column style formats, and we have a list of team radars. So for those of you not familiar with team radars, this is a data-driven exercise that is meant to be quick, but also a way to sort of figure out what it is your team should talk about. You know, not just deciding for your team what you think is the most important if you're the facilitator, but allowing your team to communicate where they're feeling pain, where there might be disagreement. And this can be a really great way to help create focus as we continue the conversation. So I am going to bring us into a work environment radar. This is just one of our many templates. We have templates based on development processes, development practices, as well as Scrum ceremonies and work environment. So what happens now? We are entered into the define phase. For those of you that are watching the webinar today and looking at my screen, what you're going to see is I'm playing the role of a facilitator. So that means I'm going to progress the team through these different phases. For everyone else that might be participating in the demo with me, your screen should have changed in real time. We're now officially in this session together, but you're not going to be able to make any changes yet because we want to take a moment to ensure the team is aligned. So you can imagine this, we're kicking off our retrospective, and you as the facilitator decide, I want to check in with the team to understand how's our work environment going. We'll take a moment to understand that everyone has clarity around what it is we're evaluating. So we're going to look at our technical skills and expertise, our tools and technology, our collaboration, process and practices, etc. And if we all feel that we have a clear understanding that we're evaluating on a scale of 1 through 5, 5 being we did the best we could in these areas, and 1 being we've got a lot of room for improvement, I will say, all right, let's collect the responses of what the team thinks, and I will progress us to where we actually get to start voting on things together. So once again, everyone's screen should have updated. And now what you're able to do is actually cast a rating on each of the different spokes that you see here. So for those of you in the demo with me, I'd like to ask that you go ahead and cast your votes. You'll be able to click on one number per spoke in order to evaluate your ratings. And whether you're watching on my screen or if you are a participant, I want to direct your attention to the left-hand side where the list of participants are. What you should be noticing is there are some people that have empty radars. It looks like just a nice little star or asterisk next to their name. There are some with all of the dots on their name, and there are some with just a couple dots remaining. What this represents is the votes that you're casting here. So I mentioned before, well, there's a lack of psychological safety, and that's a problem we're trying to solve for. This is one immediate example of that. You're able to see the engagement of your team, which can definitely be challenging when we're all distributed like we are, but without having to call anyone out or have to guess or even compromise people's votes, meaning we reveal what they're voting for, I'm able to make a judgment that there are 2 people left that need to cast their votes at this screen. I don't know what those who have voted for, those who have voted, what they voted for. That's not going to be revealed to me or to anyone else. We just know that they've participated and completed this task. So I should complete my votes. I'm just going to do this at random here. All right. So I can see all but one person has completed voting. For today's purposes, we're not going to wait or call them out, but you can imagine you'd have that opportunity to chat them on the side, let them know, hey, please cast your rating. And now we get to the good stuff. Let's analyze these results because that's going to tell us what we do with the rest of our retrospective. All right. So we took 90 seconds to complete that exercise, and now we're presented with a lot of lines. But what does this mean? We want to make it easy for you to digest this information. So we start with looking at things like the average, which should populate on everyone's screen. And right off the bat, we can see we're doing pretty good. You know, this is 13 of us casting at random, so things are probably going to be pretty average. But if we wanted to, we could look at scope and schedule and processes and practices and notice that those averages are a little bit lower. Maybe we're feeling a little more pain around those areas than we are culture and values or technical skills and expertise, which have a 3.8 and above rating. So within 90 seconds, maybe closer to 2 minutes, what we've done here is figured out where the team is feeling some pain, and can make a decision to say, let's focus our attention on this for our retrospective. Now, you may not have to do this every retrospective. You may also do this more regularly than your retrospectives as a way to check in with your team. But it's a valuable way to get data-driven feedback that can complement the more anecdotal, subjective feedback that you get in those column-style formats. It's also an interactive experience, which I can see a couple people clicking around into the median, which is great. There's definitely more ways to explore the data that if the average doesn't tell the full story, you can start to dig in deeper. One other view I like to show, and then I'll pause for questions, is the normal distribution. So because this is a group doing it at random, we're going to see a lot of disagreement because there wasn't a shared experience. But what you can picture, and if you are looking at these humps, is something that is taller and thinner. So if we look at cultures and values, we can see that's a slightly bigger bump than the rest. That's going to represent agreement. That means the votes that we cast were closer together and we're more in agreement about that score. But if we look at, for example, collaboration, which seemed like a pretty good score with a 3.7, there's a very wide, flat, short curve there, and that represents disagreement. That means we had people voting 5, people voting 4s and 3s, as well as 2s and 1s. And just as important as it can be to talk about a low average, it's also important to talk about disagreement. Where there's disagreement, you're more likely going to have more conversation take place because there's differences in perspectives to be discussed. So those are just a couple ways we can take a look at the radar to help us start to create focus and shared understanding of what it is we care about and is important to the team as we dive into reflecting upon our last sprint, our last project, or whatever may have happened that we decided to retrospect on. So that's the team radar. I do want to pause for a moment because it is a quick exercise, but it is a very impactful exercise. So I want to see if there's any questions about what we just walked through or in general about what you can do with this functionality.
We'll take a minute to see if we can gather some questions. And if you are a late arrival, I'm going to stick the link to join us in the interactive session one more time in the chat.
Fantastic. So I'm not seeing any questions, but I am seeing activity, which is always awesome to see. So yes, the team radar in a nutshell is this quick data-driven exercise that can help your team create focus. And it is a team established focus, not facilitator established, which is what makes that more powerful because it's what the team's energy is being put into. This is what they care about and are concerned about. So now what do we do with this information? I don't see any questions coming in, Audrey, but if they do, let me know and we can pause or circle back to this.
Sure, we do have one question popping up, and it's, would you do this particular radar per project or just in general for a team? Typically because my retros cover multiple projects.
That's a great question. Depending on how you're retroing with your projects, does each project get its own retrospective experience? Does the team reflect on all of them? That would likely dictate how you might use this best with your team. So if you complete a retrospective on each project, I would say you probably want to hold one team radar per project. So I know that's not a direct answer. It definitely depends on how your team likes to come together and meet. And I'd be happy to follow up with some more personalized suggestions if you're interested.
Great, and that got the questions spinning. So we'll just take a couple more so we keep moving.
Okay.
But can we do the team radar more often than a retro, like daily happiness index or safety check?
Absolutely. It's really up to you how you can get the most benefits out of this. And for some, that may be just at your retrospective, but for others, it may be a way to constantly check in with your team in a quick way that everyone can feel equal in giving their feedback on. It also starts to create a great visual over time of, okay, well, process and practices is slowly improving this week, or maybe halfway through the week, the rating went way down. Let's talk about it. So the frequency is really, I think, something you work out with your team, but you, in terms of technical ability, you can absolutely set this up and run it daily for your team.
Perfect. And then a couple of functionality questions. Can you
Sure.
lock those check boxes for the participants?
You cannot, and I'm sure right now it's a little bit distracting. On demos, it can be just because we have a lot of different people coming together. But part of kicking off your retrospective is making sure that your teams have sort of a working agreement and an understanding. This is something you guys are doing together. So playing and kind of doing whatever you want is not something you would normally do in the scope of your team. So the first time you go through it, we recommend letting your team play, but then from then forward, it's typically not an issue.
Great. And last one, I think this will lead us into more of your presentation, but can you add custom areas?
Absolutely. So the team radar can be fully customized. You can modify an existing one, which is that first stage. If you're looking at the bottom navigation bar, there is the word define. That represents your opportunity to actually modify an existing template, or that'll be where you set up your completely custom radar. So you can really match this up to KPIs you may be accountable for, or other metrics or areas of focus that you're watching with your team on.
Ooh, I was going to let that be the last one, but we have one more. Can you show history?
Absolutely. So we will circle back to that in a moment because the history doesn't, the retros do not save to the history until you close it. So right now there's nothing there, but as soon as we end this, it'll be there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions on that end, Audrey? I guess I don't see them, so I'll depend on you.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to read them out. A second part of that question is, can you export data and create your own graphs from this?
So let's table that thought for now, because that's kind of a good at the end component to address, and I'll make a note of that.
All right, well, that's it for question session number 1. I think we can keep moving and collect some more questions along the way.
Awesome. All right, so I am going to end this retrospective. We reached the final phase. There's nothing more for us to do here. And so now what that's going to do is it's going to bring us back to the home screen where we can select to initiate another retrospective type. So I'm going to click that Start Retro button, and then I'm brought to the menu where I have the team radars and the sticky notes and columns. So the sticky notes and columns has everything from Lean Coffee to Mad, Sad, Glad to Start, Stop, Continue to create your own. So if there's a format you don't see here, like we get asked about sailboat often, you can create a sailboat format by adding your custom columns to reflect things like anchors, sunshine, wind sails, and make it your own. So there's definitely ways to have more than just what's presented here in terms of templates. For today, though, we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to do just a Mad, Sad, Glad for us. And when I click to initiate that retrospective, again, it's going to update for everyone. So that real-time collaborative experience is here, that as long as we're all in as a participant, we're going to be seeing the same thing and not trying to figure out what page someone else is on and not having to share your screen either. So now you can imagine we ran our team radar at the start of the retrospective, or maybe we've been running them on and off for the week and have discovered, our processes really need some attention. People are feeling pain around that. That's what we discovered. So I'm going to prompt the group to say, all right, team, what are you mad, sad, and glad about as it relates to our team's processes? And now what everyone can do is we'll set a timer. Let's say we're going to give the group 10 minutes to 10 minutes to think. We won't actually take that long, but I'm going to set a timer and ask everyone to click to start creating a note. And so it doesn't have to actually be about processes. It can be random gibberish, lorem ipsum for all I care. But I do ask that you just start typing something. And so for those of you that are in the app, and in a moment, those of you that are watching, what you should start to notice is a difference between what you're typing and what others are typing. So you'll be able to see what you're typing. Of course, we want you to be able to know what you're typing and not playing a guessing game. But for everyone else that is contributing cards on your screen, it's going to be blurred out. Now, this isn't because we don't want you to know what your teammates are saying, but rather we're keeping in mind two things here. We're preserving that psychological safety that we've worked to build by creating this space. So by giving your team the privacy to think and not feel like they're going to be criticized for what they're typing, or if we think about a Google Doc where you can see what everyone's saying, you know, it really gives you that space to give your open, honest feedback, especially if it's critical. But the other side of that is to help prevent groupthink. So a lot of times the way that we brainstorm is actually not the most effective way to do it, according to an article from Harvard Business Review. Essentially that, you know, brainstorming together all at the same time, seeing what each other are contributing, really we kind of get less creative that way. We kind of get lazy and look at what others are typing and say, yeah, that works. Whereas here, by giving ourselves that space to think and really dig into the details of our own brain of, well, what am I mad, sad, and glad about as it relates to this topic? You're going to get more diverse perspective from your team, which is, as we move through this process, going to help you really get to the core of what's going on and what action should you take from this conversation. So it looks like the cards have stopped. I do like to pause right here to see if there's initial questions about what's happening on the screen. Is there anything popping up yet, Audrey?
We do have one, but I'm going to save it for outside of this retrospective.
Sounds good. All right. So we can imagine, let's say we had our 10 minutes to, you know, give our feedback. We all wrote our cards. We feel ready to move on. So I know there's still some cards being created, but I am going to push us along here. The next phase that we're going to enter into is the group phase. So as you can imagine, when you have people brainstorming privately, there is going to be some overlap. It's just bound to happen. So the grouping phase is meant to address some of that concern around let's group the same topics together. But it's also an opportunity to further create focus. What we want to do here is find topics of conversation. So I can listen, I can listen using speakers when work from home, and maybe something like, I'm trying to make a fake connection here, but something that may not seemingly go together, but is actually related and needs to be talked about together can be grouped. So it's not just about what's the same. So communication, and I can listen using speakers. So maybe this is actually communication challenges we're facing, is headsets and headphones and speaker quality. So two seemingly different topics are actually related and should be grouped together so that they can be discussed in the same context. So that part one, getting rid of duplicates. Part two, how do we create more focus and really start to look for patterns of the feedback that we're sharing. And I've seen a few people grouping. If anyone else wants to give it a try, this is a fully collaborative experience. So I can see in real time someone dragging and dropping. I can see that when you drag and drop, you can start to give things a title here. Awesome. A lot of questions we get about this phase is because, you know, everyone can group. There's not a way to lock that down. Is, well, how do we approach this? Isn't that overwhelming? And again, I would say that it depends on your team. We have some teams that like to set a 5-minute timer in silent group. This is actually what the Retrium team does when we run our retrospectives, is we turn our mics off, we mute them, and then we just group and read and move things around as we see fit, and then take a couple minutes at the end to, you know, confirm or have some discussion around maybe where we disagree on a grouping. So we have that time to ourselves and then a chance to come back together as a team. Now, if you're looking for something that mimics more of an in-person experience where you have a couple people go up and group on behalf of the group, you can accomplish that as well by simply asking for a few people from your team. I might say, all right, Jeff and Samantha, would you guys like to volunteer to be our groupers? And they can say yes. And then we'll have a verbal conversation where then those two designated groupers will take action in the app. So there's definitely multiple ways to do it. And at the end of the day, the goal is something that works well for your team.
And Megan, we have a question. Yes, can you group across columns? And I think that's what we're seeing because you see the little tag of sad and mad. Yep.
Exactly. So you can group across columns, and this goes back to what we kind of looked at in the team radar, where disagreement's just as important to talk about. One person may think something was sad and something else was glad, and it's important that we have an opportunity to recognize those differences in perspective. So absolutely can group across columns. You'll be able to keep track of the original column that it was in by the tag in the top left corner of the right corner, excuse me, of the card. And you can always click to expand a group by just clicking on that group of cards as well. Now, the expanding is asynchronous. So if I expand it on my screen, it's not going to expand it on your screen. So that is a little bit of a difference in view, but we're all seeing the same group of cards and seeing the dragging and dropping in real time together.
All right. And then do the colors of the cards mean anything?
I forget to talk about that sometimes. It does not mean anything at all. It is actually just randomized completely, meant to add a little bit of color to the experience and keep things light. Another thing, oh, sorry.
I feel like you're going to get to this, but we do have a dot voting.
Yes, we do. Yep. Perfect segue. I do want to point out one last thing though at this phase is while the cards were revealed, and there's always a moment of sort of chuckles and getting familiar with everything just because you never know what's going to have been written, and there's always personalities in the group, right? It is still anonymous. So it's not that you input your feedback and it's private and then suddenly you're, on the chopping block exposed, but rather, it still continues to be anonymous. To preserve that psychological safety, we feel that it makes, it's easier for users to opt in to say, that was my card when they're feeling comfortable than it is to remove that. So right now, it is something that if you wanted to identify yourself to your cards, if you feel comfortable with that, you can state that verbally in your discussion, or in the think phase, if you really want to tie yourself to it, you can add your name to the card if you feel like that is a fit for your team. But otherwise, it does stay anonymous throughout the whole experience. So just wanted to add that in there, but we'll move on to the voting phase. So perfect question segue there. All right, so much like we saw with the team radar, where you click to cast your ratings and we can monitor how many votes you have left on the left-hand side, you're going to click on the plus sign above a card to cast a vote. And so you can cast your votes all on one card if you feel it's absolutely vital to talk about. Or if you have a few topics that you think are important for the team to discuss, you can cast your votes across multiple cards. So I'll go ahead and ask the group to cast your votes. A common question we get is, well, how do we know how many votes we get? Can we customize that? So the votes are actually decided on based on the number of topics. We follow agile best practices there. And if you're in the app and we click on the I that's in the navigation bar at the bottom, it tells you each participant has 4 votes because there were 11 topics. We take the square root of 11 and round it, and that decides the number of votes. So we know it's going to scale proportionally, that if you have a really big retro, you're not going to have 100 votes to worry about. And if you have a smaller retro, you're only going to get a couple or smaller number of topics in your retro. You're only going to have a couple votes, and so that there's still meaning in where you're placing them. So let me cast my votes. And just get those out of the way. I can see some other people are casting them as well. One thing I want to kind of have you all take away from this moment is we've really been working to create focus so that when we get to the discuss phase, we're talking about the most important thing on the team's mind. So if we take a step back, we ran that team radar at the start of the retrospective to help us understand that we needed to spend a little more time talking about processes. We collected that feedback through the think phase and said, well, what's everyone seeing and feeling and mad, sad, glad about in terms of processes? We started to create topics of conversation when we entered the group phase so we could really start to notice those themes and patterns. And now as we reach this vote phase, what we're asking you to do and would ask your teams to do is to vote for the thing that is absolutely vital that you talk about. That's one of the big challenges that we've seen with retrospectives is it's tempting to try and talk about everything. And when you have too broad a lens, it can be really difficult to take action on a lot of things, especially if you don't fully understand the why of it, or the how we can take those steps to really see change. So by taking this moment to sort of continue down this funnel of focus, where we get to next is the discuss phase, and where screens are going to look a little different when we get there. Before I do that, though, any questions on voting, Audrey?
Not on voting.
Okay. So we'll enter the final phase then of this format, and that is the discuss phase. And what we have decided is really important for us to talk about today is the kids won't put dishes in the sink. It's driving us all mad. What can we do about it? So as a facilitator, I may decide, okay, this is, you know, our top topic. We've got 30 minutes left in our retrospective. Let's start with 10 minutes on the clock. And I'm going to put 10 minutes on the clock. And now it becomes about the discussion. This is a chance for us to say, okay, well, do we understand why kids won't put dishes in the sink? Does anyone have ideas for how to get them to start putting dishes in the sink, or hypotheses for making this happen that we can experiment with? And so now what you're really doing is focusing on what actionable learning can you take away from this? And as the team discusses and asks each other questions, the facilitator can capture these action items in the action plan on the right-hand side. So I might say, ask kids why 5 times, since they love to ask us why 5 times about everything. And when I add that action item, it will appear on everyone's screen that you can say, you know what, let's ask kids 10 times, you know, the question why, and really get to understand. And the second part of that, let's add on to that action item. We actually want to come back and regroup on what our kids say before we decide what to do next. So you can really make that a collaborative discussion together. And so you may take the full 10 minutes. You may take less than 10 minutes to decide what it is you're going to do, and in which case we can move on to the next topic. But the goal here is that your team is able to focus on one thing at a time to make sure that you're walking away with the most energized action item, meaning something you guys are passionate about and want to take action on and are feeling ready to take on. You know, that's the other hard part of follow through, is if your team doesn't care about it, action's not likely to take place. And so that's why we hope that through the voting and through the conversation and the collaborative actioning, what you decide to put into your action plan is going to be something that can get done and show that iterative progress. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment. And again, want to see if there's any questions about where we are right now.
There sure are. So
okay.
This one, can we run this over the course of a few days instead of 10 minutes? We do have release retrospectives that we allow people to comment on over a week, and then we go over the final data together.
Absolutely. So that think phase, you can open that up and leave that sitting for 2 days, for a week. We actually have some customers that leave it open for the duration of the sprint. Now, I will add a little disclaimer there that sometimes you get a little too much information from that method. But again, that's at your discretion for how you want to organize that. But the application will stay open. You can collect that feedback, and then when you're ready to move on, you can progress through the rest of the stages. One other thing I'll add to that before we look to other questions, Audrey, is let's say you want to keep your retrospective open for a couple days to collect that feedback in the think phase, but you also want to run a team radar with your team. So there is a button that, if you're looking at my screen at least, you'll see the button, but not the same capabilities at the moment if you're a participant. There is a gear icon in the bottom menu that when you click it, if you are the facilitator, it will end the retro at whatever phase you're at. So when I end that retro, if I was to end it right now, it'll now save to the history. So this will be a good opportunity for everyone to go ahead and click into the history if they'd like, or watch my screen. And so the 2 retrospectives we ran today are now stored in the history. Now let's imagine that this Mad, Sad, Glad that we did, we started it, collected feedback, but wanted to run a team radar, so we ended it. That means it saves to the history here. You run your team radar, you collect your feedback, that's great. We got some additional insights that we didn't already have. Now I'm ready to restart my column style format. When you come to the history, and you click onto a retro, there is a blue bar at the top, and on the right-hand side, there's a trash can And then in the middle are 2 arrows that when you highlight over, say, continue running this retro. And when you click that, provided there's no currently active retro in this team room, it'll reopen the retrospective to whatever phase it was ended in. So if you ended it at the think phase, it would reopen to that think phase. So this is a great way that if you wanted to create some custom templates in advance of your retro, you can create them, close them, and they'll be saved to your history. If you wanted to collect feedback with feedback in advance of your retrospective and still run a team radar, that open and closing is also a great way to make that happen. And we have articles on sort of how to do that with screenshots. So I'm happy to go back to that, but we'll also make sure that you have these resources as well for when you get started. Other questions, Audrey?
Yes. For folks who do retrospectives with multiple teams, how do they identify which retrospective or radar is for one team or another team? And then tagging on to that, how many people can be on a team?
Great question. So I'm going to invite everyone that was in the demo with me to go ahead and flip back over to the GoToWebinar so you can see my screen, as we're going to be navigating a little bit outside of just sort of the retrospectives that we conducted. So I'll give it just a minute to make sure people can flip over. When you get over to the webinar, if you weren't there already, you should be seeing the discuss phase still. So if you have multiple teams, what you'll actually want to have set up are multiple team rooms. So if I come here, I'm in a team room, Sensei right here, but then there's this demo organization. And what we can see is there are multiple team rooms that I'm actually a member of. I'm a member of this test, Amanda's demo room, the practice room, and there's actually all these other rooms that I'm not a member of that are part of my organization. So when we started, we talked about, we're in a team room and it's a space for your group to come together to discuss the common topic that they need to meet on. I say that because sometimes teams are tribes, sometimes teams change regularly, some are project oriented, some are product oriented. It does vary from company to company, but essentially you're gonna have a space that the same group of people can come back to and know that this is their information. So if you have 3 teams, you're gonna want a different team room for each of those groups so that they have their private space and you can be a part of all 3 of them without compromising the security of the teams. And Audrey, I apologize, there's a second part to that question. It was how many can be in a team room, is that right?
Yeah.
Great. The answer is it's unlimited. We don't limit the number of users you can have in the organization or that you can have in the team room. And the reason for that is adding one person or taking a person away from your retrospective is not going to determine the success of your retro. What is going to be feeling safe with that team and being able to have the space to conduct those meetings. So we actually, your license or subscription is based on the number of team rooms that you utilize per month, and not the users that participate in a team room or are members of the organization as a whole. So I'll come back into the team room now. Other questions, Audrey?
Yes, can you name retrospectives different things or customize the name?
You can. So let me come here. And for those of you that were in the retro with me, you may not have seen this. So when you come to start a retro, you're presented with a bunch of different formats. And so if you wanted to make it your own, you can adjust the columns here. That would be, you can edit, test, etc. In the case of radars, you can actually label what the radar is called. But at the moment, the column style formats do not have sort of a topic or general title name. It is just classified by date at the moment, which if I was to click back here to the history, we'd see. So it was Thursday, June 4th.
All right, after you finish a retrospective, there's a trash can there, and someone's concerned that the trash can is scary. Does it ask for confirmation before it permanently deletes things?
It does. So you have to physically type in the word delete.
Oh,
and there's a beautiful warning that says permanently in bold, because we do agree that we don't want those accidental deletions, so it is a deliberate action. But we also recognize that sometimes you are going to be testing things out, and for those of us that really like things to stay clean and organized, it can be helpful to have that. So we try to strike a nice balance there.
Wonderful. Can you assign action items for specific people?
Great question. And the answer is not yet. That's actually in development right now, along with a JIRA integration for the action items. The goal being that any action items you create, you can then send to JIRA so that they're alongside the rest of your work. I don't have dates just yet on the JIRA or assigning action items option, but it is in development right now. So if I had to take an educated guess, I feel like we'll be seeing this come July 2020.
Megan, that's the perfect segue to our last burning question for now, and that was on integrations. Are there some integrations? Is there a way to connect Retrium to another product like Rike or Confluence?
Gotcha. So we are starting with just the JIRA integration specifically for the action items, but I imagine it's going to expand from there since we do see requests pretty often to be able to export the history, which actually brings us back to a question we had while we were in the radar. At the moment, there is not a way to export the history so that you are just automatically getting a CSV of that information to be able to run reports. We do recognize the value and need for that, so that's definitely in our plans for later this year. It's just not available yet. But we do have a lot of customers that, and being the determined, really data-driven folks that they are, that just go ahead since it is, just 5 averages or 7 averages, depending on how many spokes you have, that they're just plotting it in Excel, and that only helps make the case more for why we need that feature. So hopefully coming soon, just a matter of when.
All right, well, we've got about 15 minutes left, so maybe you want to explore a little bit more, and then we'll take a whole bunch more questions at the end.
Fantastic. So one thing I just kind of wanted to walk everyone through for more of an administration facilitation experience, since if you were participating with me, you didn't see this. The facilitator has a few additional features that you don't have when you're a participant. They can send a little chime to everyone to get their attention. There is the timer that I can set to help keep us on track and keep us time boxed and moving through each of the different phases. At any point, anyone is able to click this eye icon in the bottom menu to understand what is happening at that phase, and it also gives you insights like how many topics you've generated. Now, these are not buttons at the moment, though I think we're planning to make them clickable. They are meant to let you know what phase of the retrospective you're in. So in the case of a team radar, there's only 3 phases, but in the case of the column style, there are 4. And as the facilitator, I use this button to help navigate me through to the next phase. Now, one thing to note is right now you're not able to go backwards in a phase. That's why we have the double verification that, make sure you're ready. And when you are, you can move forward to the group phase. So you're continuing to progress down that funnel. Now, let's say you had to leave mid-retrospective, especially while we're all dealing with the work from home and crazy schedules and kids and dogs and neighbors. What if you had to leave? You don't want your team to be stuck in the middle of a retrospective. So they can take over facilitation if necessary by clicking on their gear icon and selecting this in facilitation. If you're the actual facilitator in that moment, you will be able to end the retro. Now, if you're not sure who's taken over facilitation duties, if you look next to names on the left-hand side, the one that is highlighted in gray is going to indicate who's the facilitator. So as you can guess, sometimes people get excited, are exploring, for whatever reason, they take over facilitation duties. You can see who that is, and you can also take it back if you need to. So you're not locked in that sense. Now, in the team room, everyone is equal. So we don't have team room administrators, we don't have team room managers. The goal is to empower users. So the facilitator is simply whoever starts the meeting. And that's also why it's not locked down, is you may decide you want to rotate facilitators week to week. You may want to have an outside person come facilitate. Whatever that scenario is, we want to give you flexibility. So the members that you see in the team room are just team room members. People can update the settings. Now, if I back out here into the organization level, there are roles to the organization. You can have an org manager, which is someone that can create or deactivate team rooms. That is a special privilege because that can impact your subscription by creating or deactivating team rooms. So only org managers and above can do that. And admins are those who can change the privileges of others and manage the billing settings from within the app. Now, everyone by default is an org member, which lets them participate in retrospectives and join team rooms. But if you need something a little more restrictive, there is this org visitor role, which allows you to say, for in the case of contractors or maybe guest attendees for some reason, whatever that scenario is, they can only ever see the team room that they've been invited to. They don't get this beautiful full view of what's going on in this demo org. It really limits their access. So that's where the roles and permissions come into play. But on a team room level, everyone is there together as an equal. So any questions about sort of the administration side of things? That was the quick 411 on it. We have a lot of great knowledge base articles too, but also happy to take questions right now.
Sure, we'll give it a minute. Pop your questions in there about this side of things. We did want to clarify one from earlier about
Sure.
naming the retrospective. And it was, can you give the specific retrospective session a label or name? I think we had answered that, but maybe just show us one more time.
Sure. So for the column style formats, you cannot customize that name. It is just the date as well as the format that you selected. Though we have heard feedback for that, so it is at least somewhere in the backlog at the moment. The radars, however, do actually allow for you to make edits to that in that first design phase when you have the opportunity to edit the radar itself. Because these have this custom question and titling at the top, you are able to edit that. And that'll happen when you first open the radar. The facilitator can make those changes. Does that help clear that up a little bit? Hopefully?
Perfect, yeah.
Great. And if there's no questions about administration, Audrey, we can also do sort of open-ended questions now that we're down to the last 10 minutes or so.
Sure, I think one more question good for here is when you have the action items, can you vote on the action items?
Not yet. We are actually, in addition to the JIRA integration, one of our big initiatives for the company is to spend some time on that action plan. We are the first to admit it's probably gotten the least amount of love from us. So we're really working to overhaul that experience and make it much more in depth in terms of figuring out what makes sense to do. So look forward to those changes as we really hope to level up that experience.
Wonderful, thanks. All right, if anyone has another question, stick it in. We're running low on time, so go ahead and type those in, but no big questions right now.
All right. So that's all we had for today in terms of the demo. If you are interested in signing up for a free trial, it's 30 days. It includes everything that we walk through today. We don't limit your feature capabilities in the free trial. One thing I want to point out for anyone that joined us today but didn't participate in the demo room is when you are testing this out with your team and getting started is we do encourage you to invite them to join you versus just doing a screen share, because as those of you who did participate today, you can see and experience that real-time collaboration that just doesn't happen when you're sharing a screen. So if you also have questions about how to get started and get your team onboarded, we're also happy to help with that experience as well.
Awesome. And if you're someone joining live, you'll get an email with a link to a free trial and a link to Retrium right about an hour after we wrap up.
Perfect.
And with that, I know some people don't stick around for questions, so thank you all so much for joining us today. If you need any help running your retrospectives or agile ceremonies, please reach out to LitheSpeed. We're happy to help, agile consulting, coaching, training. And if you have any questions for Retrium, Meagan, where should they reach out? Who should they contact?
Great question. So we have an email that is customerlove@retrium.com, and I'm chatting that here now. The other way too is if you don't want to email us, we do have this lovely chat bot that's in the bottom right corner that allows you to either search our knowledge base right here, or you can send us a message directly in the app, and you can see all my lovely test messages here, but this will normally be a nice fresh conversation that you can kick things off with us.
Wonderful. Okay, so if you are good with it, Meagan, let's take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up.
Perfect.
We have an interesting question. Can you make a retrospective template with multiple exercises in one retro?
That's a good question, and not yet. It's like you're reading our mind on that one. That is where we want to be able to take this so that you can preset a flow. Right now, each retrospective is an individual thing that you set up. You can set up multiple and save them to your history, but you'd still have to continue each one individually.
Got it.
I think I understood that question right.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And if not, who wrote it, you can go ahead and clarify a little bit in the chat. We have another one back to that Jira integration in progress, and we're wondering, is there an on-prem package for Retrium, and how will the Jira integration work? Is it Jira in the cloud? Do you have an answer on that?
I don't just yet. I know I can answer part of that, in that we do not have an on-prem version of Retrium. It is cloud-based, web-based, like we see here. So in terms of what that means for Jira, I'm not as familiar yet. It would be kind of like a normal integration where you connect the accounts, but I don't know if on-prem versus cloud has any impact on that. So I'd probably have to defer to the release notes when we get closer to that date to be able to provide that insight.
Sounds good. All right, I think we are done with questions. Any other questions, please send to customerlove@retrium.com or send Agile training coaching questions to info@LitheSpeed.com. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And Meagan, thank you so much for your time, and what an awesome demo and great tool.
Thanks so much for having me, Audrey. Very excited to work with you all today, and we hope to see you in the app.
Awesome. All right, we'll see ya. Have a good day.
Bye.